You've invested a lot of money in your software and you need to get up to speed as quickly as possible. The best way to learn today's high-end graphics software is with a video course from Total Training. Each Total Training series is packed with time-saving tips and techniques that will make you productive in record time. Total Training's approach is based on years of hands-on, real-world production experience. We don't just read you the manual. Our first series, Total AE, covers all aspects of using After Effects, Adobe's powerful compositing and animation software. Total AE goes beyond simple explanation into detailed demonstration of every feature from basic to advanced. There are often many different ways to accomplish the same task in After Effects. Total AE will point out which ways are better and why. The Total Premiere series starts with an introduction to every nook and cranny of the Premiere interface and proceeds through advanced looks at audio, motion controls, working with the timeline, and effects. Total Premiere also guides you through the upgrade path from version 4 to version 5. Total Final Effects Complete teaches you to create high-end visual effects using ICE's powerful set of filters. You'll learn how to blow stuff up, burn it down, squish it around, drown it in water. In other words, these are the really fun tapes. If you create special effects for a living, or if you want to, this is the course for you. If you ask a group of graphics professionals the one program they own that they wish they knew better, the likely answer will be Metacreation's Painter. Our Total Painter series is the answer to that wish. Presented by painter maestro Jeremy Sutton, Total Painter is a comprehensive, in-depth exploration of a deep, often confusing, but incredibly powerful piece of software. Whether you try Total AE, Total FE, Total Premiere, or Total Painter, you'll never regret your investment in Total Training. No other career investment you make will pay for itself so quickly. Make sure you visit our website for the latest information about our exciting new and upcoming products, or to order a product demo. Above all, have fun. For Total Training, I'm Brian Maffitt, and I'll see you in the next tapes. Welcome to Total Premiere. I'm Brian Maffitt, and for the next hour or so, I'll be taking you on a tour of what's new in Adobe Premiere 5.0. We made the presumptuous assumption that most of you would be upgrading from an earlier version of Premiere, so we're concentrating on the new stuff. But if you're new to Premiere, don't worry, this tour will show you some very cool things. If you like what you see, stay tuned at the end of the demo for information on how to order the full version of Total Premiere, a comprehensive training series that starts with the basics and guides you through to the most advanced features of this powerful program. If you want to follow along with any of the techniques I'm demonstrating, you can download the demo project we'll be using, complete with footage from the Total Training website. Or you can just fire up your copy of Premiere and play with the buttons. Whatever you choose to do, let's start out with a quick tour of what's new in the Premiere interface. When you first open up the new Premiere 5.0, it brings you into the new Project Settings box. Now, this is a modal box that lets you pick between these 5 different settings: general settings, video, audio, keyframe and rendering, and capture settings. And you can jump right to a setting that you want with this pop-up here, or you can just check your settings in your current box and click the next button, which will take you over to the next one. So here we are in video. Let's change our compressor to the one that we're going to be using, which is Media 100 NTSC. Generally speaking, the settings that you make in the project are related to what your final output is going to be, but you should, particularly if you've digitized footage with a card that's capable of playing back footage in real time, it's best to set your project up to support that compression, that codec, which we're doing here by picking Media 100. Millions is fine, 64480, the rest of this is all okay. Let's go to our audio. Again, this is all okay. And keyframe and rendering options, all fine. Everything pops into place, and you'll see that things don't look very much like they used to look. Now, before we get into this in great detail, let's import a little bit of footage. Let's go to Import Multiple. Add a few pieces of NASA footage. and a grand piece of music to animate them to. And you'll notice, first of all, that there are some changes here in the project window. Now, let me resize things so you can see them a little bit better. If you're a big fan of the old way things used to look in Premiere 4.2, you can still access that. You have some buttons down here that let you toggle different looks for the project window. The middle one here brings back the large icons with the audio underneath, plus the information directly to the right of it setting. Or if you pick the first one, you get this nice choice of icons. This is sort of similar to how an Avid might show files. But the third setting looks a little bit more like After Effects and a little bit more like the Adobe standard that we're coming to see in all of the Adobe products. Now, the names that we see up here at the top of the window are the different properties related to each of the clips that we've brought in. And each of these properties allows us to sort by that property. For example, we could sort by duration if we wanted to, for some reason, just by clicking on the word duration. Now the order of everything is changed so that things are sorted in order from shortest to longest duration. Well, that's not very exciting, but if we scroll over, you can see that there's a ton of stuff that we can sort by, including this last box, the comment box, which, if you click on it, allows you to type in anything you want, up to 32K, so you could write a short novella in there if you wanted to. Also worth noting is that the divisions can be adjusted. If you just click on the dividing line and drag around, you can actually change the widths of your columns in case you're using particularly long file names and your names aren't showing up, or particularly short ones and you don't want to waste all this space. You can just drag things over. And even more important, if you couldn't care less what your media type was, but you're really, really interested in those comments that you've written, you can drag the different elements around any which way that you want, so that we could put comment immediately after the name. So right there, with Premiere 5.0, they've added some great abilities to keep track of your footage. Now, once you've got the footage in here in the project window, there are even more options for keeping track of it. You can, just like Premiere 4.2, store clips in libraries. Okay, you can also create bins. Now, bins are sort of like the old folders in Premiere and the current folders in After Effects, except bins, we'll call one audio, and we'll call another one video. Except in addition to letting you sort of store stuff in the bins, put all of our video in there and our audio up in there. But when you double click on a bin, you'll see that it opens up into another window with the same sort commands and the same abilities to pick either icons or list view. In other words, sub-bins can all have different settings within the original project window. So again, if you have heavily visual items, you might choose to sort those by icons, so at a glance you can tell what you're looking at. Whereas if you have a lot of different audio clips and you've labeled them in such a way that you can easily identify them, you might want to keep those in list mode instead. At any rate, you've got a lot of flexibility here for keeping track of programs, and that can be very important because the new Premiere can have a program up to 3 hours now, and at 2 hours and 59 minutes, the audio will still be in sync with the video because Premiere 5.0 has fixed that annoying audio drift bug that we used to have. But project windows aren't really what you've come in here to look at, probably. Let's take a look at a few more things in the interface. Now, before we look at them in too much detail, note that they are conforming now to the Adobe standard of tabbed palettes that also dock with each other. And this is going to do us a lot of good because we're on a dinky little 640 by 480 monitor, which means we don't have a lot of room to maneuver here. So it's a great thing that we can yank off these tabs and put them all into the same palette where we can just tab from one item to the other and give ourselves a little bit more screen real estate. You probably won't have to do this at home, but it's good to know that you can. The info window is pretty much like it was before. If you used it before, here it is for you to use again. The command palette hasn't changed much. You can assign common commands to F keys and access them with a single keystroke. The navigator's brand new, but we're not going to talk about it right now because we don't have anything to navigate through. We haven't added anything to our program timeline. So what I'm going to talk about right now is the transitions palette. And the first thing I'll point out about it, you've probably already noticed, and that's the transitions aren't animated anymore. You look down here and they're just kind of sitting still, kind of boring. Well, if that ever bugged you, that's probably a relief. But if you miss those animated icons, they're still available in here. You can just pick Animate from the Transitions pop-out menu. And there they are moving again. And if you liked the big chunky icons instead of these small ones now, you can just uncheck Hide Descriptions, and the larger blocky icons show up again. Now, if you tend to edit like I tend to edit, which is primarily with cuts and an occasional cross dissolve and maybe a gradient wipe if you really want one, this incredibly long list of terrific effects and wipes and transitions can sometimes be more than you want to maneuver through while you're putting your project together. Well, the new version of Premiere gives us the opportunity to customize this palette now so that it better suits the way you like to work. Let's take a look at cross dissolve, which is my most commonly used transition. If we want to use cross dissolves more than anything else, why should we have to hunt all the way down to the letter C anymore, particularly since you can't quickly type a letter to jump to an effect anymore? Well, if you just click and drag cross dissolve up to the top of the list, well, it doesn't care about alphabetical order anymore. If you go out of your way to reorder it, that's where it'll stay. And now the next time we open our transitions palette, the cross dissolve will be right up there at the top. Let's grab our gradient wipe and do the same thing. Oops, went too far. And now we've added our two favorite effects, cross dissolve and gradient wipe, up here at the top of the menu, and all of the other ones have kind of fallen behind here. If we really want them, we can dig down there and get them. But what if this is a little too cluttered for our tastes? What if we just want to lose these altogether? Well, if you pick an effect that you don't want to be on the menu anymore, you can tell Premiere to hide that effect by picking Hide Selected from the pop-out menu there. In fact, if you don't want any of these effects, except for your cross dissolve and your gradient wipe, just select them all. Pick Hide Selected, and now they're gone. And your transitions palette only contains the effects that you want to use. Don't worry, they're still there. You can always go to Restore Transitions, and when the Restore Transitions window pops open, you can select whatever effect you decide you want to work with again, more than one of them if you care to by holding down the Shift key. Click Show, and now those effects show up here in the Transitions window where you can get at them again. Now you may have noticed that the Cross Dissolve button up here at the top has a black outline around it, while the rest of them just have this sort of gray beveled outline. What does that mean? Well, it means Cross Dissolve has been selected as the default transition, which is a good thing. It's my favorite. But let's say we wanted Gradient Wipe as our default transition. Again, we go into our little pop-out window here, and we tell it to set selected as default. It'll ask us the duration in frames. We'll just leave that at 20 for now. Now you can see as we take the highlight off of it that the Gradient Wipe has now got a little black outline around it saying that it's the default transition. Now how do you work with the default transition? Well, I'll show you how to do that when we get to the buttons in the center of the monitor window. So we're coming up to that. And meanwhile, let's set Cross Dissolve back to our default transition. Now I'm afraid I can't continue to give an effective demo with dancing icons in the upper right hand corner here, so we're going to turn off Animate, and we're also going to set our descriptions to be hid again. That makes things much smaller. Let's roll up a palette by double clicking on it and get it out of the way altogether so we can see our lovely monitor window a little bit better. We can scale our project window up just a little bit as well and bring our monitor window up front. Now what's going on here? In the old days of Premiere, we would have had a simple clip window for every single clip that you opened up, and you'd set in and out points in those clip windows and you'd drag those into the timeline. Well, no longer. Now we have a clip window on the left and the program window on the right. Now how do these work? Well, there's nothing in either of them right now because there's nothing in the program down there, and we haven't added anything to the clip window. So let's do that now. First of all, if we open up our audio bin, we can click and drag the audio in, which just shows up in the clip window as an audio icon. Now we know we have 5 video clips here in the video bin, and if we want to add all of them, we'll just drag the whole bin in, and they're all going to show up in the bin now. Notice now at the bottom of the clip window, the word liftoff shown up here. Well, that's the name of this clip that we're currently looking at, and if we click on this, it's a pop-up, and it allows us to choose any of the sources that we've added into our source window so that we can now work with them. Now, pretty much, source clips work the way they used to if you choose to work that way. There's a bunch of new little buttons in the middle of the window here that we'll get to in a bit. But for the time being, let's just talk about how you work with the source window. Let's quickly set an in point and an out point. And just drag a clip down here in the timeline. We'll move a little later, set another in point, another out point. Drag that down in the timeline, set another in point on our third clip. NASA's already done a nice job of pre-editing this for us, but we want to synchronize this to a little bit of music. And as you can see, pretty much if you care to, you can work just like you always used to work in Premiere. Now if we click and scrub here in the timeline, you'll see what the other window's all about. That's our preview window of what's going on down here in the timeline. So in the old days, you had a preview window that lived by itself, or you could send it to an external monitor. You can still do that. In the case of Media 100 footage, for example, when you work like this, the footage gets exported to the NTSC monitor. Works the same way with any real-time output card. But if just clicking and dragging and setting points the way you always did was all of the innovation in 5.0, it wouldn't be very impressive. Well, there's a whole new way of editing now with 5.0 that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes that involves these buttons in here and some fun little keyboard shortcuts that make everything go very quickly. And as soon as we get a little further along in the program, we'll talk about those in greater detail. So let's talk a little bit about this new timeline. Well, first of all, the timeline needs to be bigger than it is right now. We've got it shrunk way down so we could see our monitor window. Again, we're working on a 640-480 monitor, so we're kind of cramped for space. We're going to make our timeline window a little bit larger here. So again, you can see pretty much like before, we have a couple video layers that are layer A and layer B, and a transition layer if you want to add a transition in between things, and an overlay layer where you can key graphics in above video elements. They're all video layers now. You don't get the superimposed layer like you used to do. They all behave properly now. What I mean by that is elements in Premiere are now stacked from the bottom to the top in the timeline corresponding to from the back to the front in the actual program. So just like you'd be working with layers in Photoshop and just like you'd be working with layers in After Effects, elements here in the Premiere timeline stack up in the order that they're actually going to show up in the program window, which is a great relief. Also, just like Photoshop, you can turn the visibility of layers on and off with the little eyeball here. And when you turn a layer's visibility off, it doesn't show up at all in the program anymore. So if you've decided to stop working with something for a while, or if it's slowing you down too much, you can turn the visibility of something off completely. That's kind of a no-brainer. Let's bring in an audio clip here. Got our fanfare movie. We'll drag it into our audio channel. Now, if you don't want to accidentally edit the audio channel when you're trying to edit your video, you can lock a channel by clicking on the little box next to its icon. Again, turn audio channels on and off by clicking on their little speaker icon. But the little box next to it, just like in Photoshop, you click on it and it puts a little pencil with a red line through it telling you that you can't do anything to that layer now. And you'll notice that pointer has a little lock on it now telling you, nope, can't do anything to that. That's fine. But another more subtle innovation here is better explained if we give you a little setup here. Say instead of this little A and B video layer and one overlay layer here, we had about 30 layers going straight up. And let's say you'd worked on the bottom 20 of those layers and you were really happy with what you'd done, but you were really getting tired of having to root your way all the way up through 30 layers to work on the top 10. In other words, it'd be nice to still see a video layer without actually having to see it here in the timeline where it's getting in our way. Well, we can make a layer shy in Premiere just like you make a layer shy in After Effects. Now, what does shy mean? Well, if you hold down your keyboard shortcut and click on the eye, the pupil goes away. You just poke it in the eye and its pupil goes away. and absolutely nothing else happens. Why do we do that? Because if you pull the little pop-up over here, you have the option to hide shy tracks. We'll pick that. And when we hide shy tracks, the tracks that we've poked in the eye go away from the timeline, but they still show up in the program when you're actually working with them. It's a very handy way to get things out of the way in the timeline here, where things can get pretty complex pretty fast without actually having to render them invisible, which is what would happen if you actually turned off their visibility. Now, let's temporarily turn our audio off. There we go. Now, it's also worth noting that the A and B tracks can be collapsed down further by clicking the little twirly arrow here. So now you can see the first full icon representing the first clip. The second little icon is the length of the amount of overlap between the first two clips, and then the second clip carries on from there. And you can edit fully with the track collapsed like this just by using the keyboard shortcuts and the buttons that are available in the new edit window. So those are a few of the cool new things in the interface. But what's with this three-point editing thingy that everybody's going on about? Well, it's a high-end editing technique that you used to have to spend $100,000 to get. In a nutshell, every edit you perform in a program contains 4 reference points: an in point and an out point in your source material, and an in point and out point in your program. If you can identify any 3 of those points, you can make an edit, hence three-point editing. Once you learn the philosophy behind how this works, you can edit very quickly. So how does it work? Let's take a look. All right, so we've returned our windows to a sort of pristine condition and gotten rid of any extraneous windows we're not going to need, so that we can better talk about the wonders of three-point editing. Three-point editing, or just advanced editing in general in Premiere, is facilitated by this new monitor window setup. As you know by now, this is the source. The program will show up over here, and the buttons in the center of the monitor window control how elements from the source window are added to the project window, and where they're added to in the project window are determined by the little target pop-ups down here, which we'll use as we need them. One thing to point out is that Premiere now conforms to the tooltips Adobe standard, meaning if you hold your mouse for a second over a tool, it tells you the name of the tool and gives you a keyboard shortcut for it if there is one. The overlay tool, for example, keyboard shortcut period, and the insert tool gives you a little comma. So what do these tools do? Well, as the names imply, the first button here inserts a clip in between a couple other clips, or just inserts it into the timeline if there are no subsequent clips. The overlay clip doesn't really have anything to do with overlay in the old sense, where an overlay would use an alpha channel of a layer to key something in over another layer. In this case, overlay means when you drop a clip into the timeline, it's going to erase any clip that's underneath it. Not erase it in a literal sense, but as far as the program is concerned. Now these two tools are for adding clips to the timeline. The two tools to the right of that are for lifting clips out of the timeline. And the first lift tool will bring a clip out, leaving a gap behind, and the second tool will bring a clip out, closing up the gap as it pulls the clip out. Now these tools to the right let you jump from edit point to edit point, let you set an overall audio level as you're working within your program, and allows you to apply a default transition. Remember, we set the default transition to cross dissolve earlier when we were looking at the transitions, and this is the button that you will use to apply that default transition when we get to that point in the editing. Well, let's start assembling a couple of clips and see how we might use some of these buttons. If we pick our liftoff clip, note that the liftoff clip is divided up into 3 sections, pre-edited by NASA. And we're going to cut these sections down so that they coincide with a little music clip that we have. Now, before we cut the video, let's take a quick listen to our music. Okay, so it's got a pretty strong rhythm there. If, as we play the music, we tap the asterisk key on the numeric keypad, we can lay down some markers that we can use as a visual reference for where to edit to. Tap, tap, tap. And hit the space bar to end, and now if we drag this down into the timeline, you can see little markers occurring with the beats of the music that we're going to use as reference to edit our little video clips to. Now if we go back to our liftoff clip, we can drag back and forth and see that we want to start our clip on the explosion. If you want to fine-tune that, the left and right arrow keys move you a frame at a time. Now, if that's where we want to start, we want to set an endpoint, which we do with the little endpoint button here. And we'll move along until we cut, again, left and right arrow keys to find exactly the point we want to end on. And we set an out point. Now, the letter I for in and O for out allow us to set in and out points with a keyboard shortcut. Once we've set an in and out point, just like the old version of Premiere, you can drag it down into the timeline. Now, fortunately for us, the timing of the clip pretty much coincides with the timing of the first area. We'll want to trim just a couple frames off the end of it there. We're happy with that. You may be wondering if you can actually scrub audio like you could in the earlier version of Premiere. Well, actually, by default, you can, but we've turned off the little audio button here. If we click on that once, it brings us to a medium level of audio, and a second time brings us up to full volume. This is just sort of a general override. This isn't intended for fine-tuning. This is just intended for your quick ability to turn audio off or turn it on quietly or turn it on at full volume. But at any rate, once this is on, clicking and dragging the timeline down here by default gives us a little bit of an audio scrub. Now, since I'm going to be clicking around here a lot and talking to you at the same time, that's going to get real annoying, so we're going to turn the music off down here instead so that we don't hear that all the time, but we still see our visual reference. All right, so we've dropped one clip down into the timeline. It's time to drop in another clip. So we want to jump to the end of this clip, which we do with our little keyboard shortcut. We're going to want to set in and out points during this section. One thing to notice is that once in and out points are already set in a layer, when it's time to set a new set of in and out points away from that, it doesn't necessarily behave the way you think it would. If we just hit an in point now, the first thing it's going to do is move the out point over, and then you hit in again and it'll bring the in point up to match it. The trouble is you can't have an in point occurring after you have an out point. That wouldn't make any sense. The clip would have to run backwards, which is not normally what people are going to want to do. So if we want to set a new in point here, we have to either click this button twice or using our keyboard shortcut, type the letter I once, which snaps the whole thing over, and then a second time brings the in point where you want it. So when you're setting an in point outside of a set of in and out points that you've already set, you just need to know that you need to tap the I key twice or click the in point button twice. So we've set an in point there. We'll move a couple of frames later, set an out point. And instead of dragging this time, let's start using our tools. If we now just click the insert button, you'll notice a couple of things have happened. First of all, the clip that we just marked an in and out point for has been dropped in down just past the first clip that we put in, which was what we wanted, but also the audio has sort of scooched itself downstream. Now what's happened here is that Premiere is making an assumption by default that if you are making an insert edit, you're not going to want to wreck your audio downstream of where you are in case you've carefully done some stuff that's synchronized to audio downstream. Now that's not our case here. So we can override that in a couple of ways. The first thing we're going to do is undo that. If we go to our timeline window options, notice on insert, shift material in all unlocked tracks is the default, which when you make an insert edit would move everything including audio that occurs after you make your insert. If instead you change that to shift material only in target tracks, then since our target track is currently set just to video, not to audio, only the video track would move. Now, this is kind of a dangerous thing to set, because if you are working on a long program and some of it does contain lip sync or other stuff you've carefully choreographed to a music track, then changing this insert default to shift material only in target tracks can get things out of order downstream. So I'm going to leave this in its default value for now, and instead I'm just going to lock the music track. By locking the track, we can't do anything to it now, and nothing that we do in the edit window is going to affect the music track in any way. And when we click the insert button again, our little clip is now going to be inserted and the music's going to stay where it belonged. So let's quickly set a third section, which we now want to cut to the liftoff. Again, click the in point twice, move a little further on, click an out point, add that clip in. And as you see, we can start just assembling stuff in without doing all the clicking and dragging that we used to have to do in the old Premiere. Now, our timing is not necessarily what we want down here, because our markers are telling us that we want this cut to be taking place here, and then this should be a little further downstream. If we just edited the old way, we would have to first drag in this clip, which messes up its endpoint. Then we'd have room to drag this clip over, or we could pull the whole clip over, making some room, and drag this over, which is probably more like what we want to do. Instead, we now have the rolling edit tool, which would allow us to roll this edit point over, which sort of like a window shade unrolls this clip while rolling up this clip. That's not really what we want to do here. We really like our endpoint on this clip. We want to unroll this clip while shoving this clip down the line. That's what the ripple edit tool is for. With the ripple edit tool, you click and drag one clip out while it simultaneously shoves the next clip in the line down without affecting its length or its in and out points. We'll now trim in that last out point. We've got 3 clips at approximately the right duration, all adjusted with some of the new edit tools, and we'll get to what some of these other ones do in just a second. So now we've stacked a few clips in here with these insert tools, but that's not a really terribly impressive thing. I mean, it's not that much of a big deal to add clips with a button instead of dragging them down. But what happens when we want to start adding clips in between other clips and other edits that we've already done? That's when these buttons really begin to come into their own. Now, once again, the whole concept of 3-point editing is that you have 4 points that make up any edit. In and out points in a source clip and in and out points in the program. If you know any 3 of those 4 points, you can make an edit. So let's talk about dropping a clip in between the first and the second clip here, and let's talk about how 3-point editing can help us do this. Right now we're going from the ignition sequence to the gantry falling away. And let's say instead of doing that, we're going to cut to a shot of these sort of Dante Inferno flames up underneath the launch pad. So we'll have a shot of ignition, a shot of flames, then we'll go to the gantry. Now, if we set an in point here and an out point here, that's 1, 2 points. The third point, by default, is assumed to be where the timeline is down here in the program. And if we now click Insert, you can see that the new in and out point and the footage that we defined up in the source window has now been plopped down in the timeline, and it has moved the other footage out of the way. It's shoved it downstream. So with the insert tool, our Flames movie pops down in and shoves everything subsequent in the film down to make room for the edit that we made. Now that's what the insert tool does. If instead of that we picked the tool underneath it, the overlay tool, we've maintained the length of our edit, and instead of shoving things downstream, the overlay tool blasts over what we had already done and covers up those clips with the new clip that we've added in. Now in both of these cases we've kind of screwed up our timing because the in and the out point that we guessed at up here in the window is the incorrect length for what we want to put in down here. And although we can make adjustments with things like the new ripple edit tool to correct this, it's much better to use our 3-point editing sort of in reverse. Rather than setting 2 points up here, let's clear those markers, and using a point down here to set the insert point, we know that we have a certain amount of space that we need to fill up down here, and that certain amount of space occurs between these 2 markers. So let's make sure that we're at our edit point here by jumping to the edit point. Okay, we'll set an in point at that marker. We'll jump to the next edit point that we've made. We'll set an out point. So now we have 1, 2 points. Go up to our flame movie and set a new in point up there, and that's 1, 2, 3 points. If we now hit insert, it's going to use those 3 points to make the edit. It'll take just enough footage down here to fill in the in and out points that we've set down here, and now we've added our clip to the movie at the correct duration that we needed to fill this amount of soundtrack. Now if we turn on our audio and preview that, It's a little jumpy, but you get the point. We now have 4 things cut in there nicely, coinciding with the musical markers that we put in place. Now let's talk about a couple of the other tools that Premiere 5 gives us to work with these sorts of clips once we've popped them into place. The same little pop-out that gives us our Ripple Edit tool, there are a few other tools, and the ones that we're going to talk about are Slip and Slide. Now why would we use these? What are these for? Well, let's consider our little flames clip that we just plopped in. We know we like the duration. We know the amount of space that it's taking up down here is what we want, but what's actually in this clip might not necessarily be the flames that we want to be in this clip. There's a good 10 seconds of flames that we have to work with, and we've just arbitrarily picked a second. What if we want to sort of shift around the contents of this layer without affecting our program or without affecting the adjacent clips? We're happy with the length of this clip. We're happy with the length of our program. We just want to shift the contents around a little bit. For that, we use the Slip tool. The Slip tool, when we click and drag, brings up these 4 windows at the top. The 2 outside windows show you your out frame from your previous clip and the in frame from your subsequent clip, and then shows you the in and out clips of the current piece of video that you're editing. And as you slide back and forth, you can see the contents are being shifted back and forth until you find exactly the section of video that you want to occupy that point in the timeline. That looks pretty nice. Once you're happy, just let go, and the clip is automatically updated with your changes. Now, the sort of complementary tool to the Slip tool is the Slide tool. The Slide tool works similarly to the Slip tool, only instead of shifting the contents of a clip around, it shifts the entire clip around, changing instead the ins and out points of the adjacent clips. It looks sort of similar if we click and drag. Now, as we scoot around, you see the windows that are changing up top. It's the in and out points of the adjacent clips that you're now seeing in those preview windows. And this allows you to sort of fine-tune exactly where a clip occurs within the context of a program. Note that this tool doesn't change the length of the program, it only changes the length of the clips before and after the clip that you're adjusting. But again, Premiere 5 gives us powerful new tools to work with our video. However, I should point out that in this whole world of 3-point editing, since the points can either be up here or down here, there are times when things misbehave. It can get kind of easy to get lost, and the easiest problem that can get you is if you've accidentally set an in and an out point somewhere down here in the timeline and you've forgotten about them. And then you go up here and you decide to set an in and an out point, and you go to do an insert, and instead of getting what you expect, which is an insert that plops in where your time marker is, you happen to have an in and an out point set somewhere else, and that's what it's going to assume you want to drop into. And God forbid you have 4 points, because then it wants to do a 4-point edit, which is a whole new level of sort of complex editing that we don't really have time to get into here, but we'll cover in great detail in the full tapes. But at any rate, the best way to clear up problems like this when you run into them is just get used to going up to your clip window and picking clear all markers. You can do that in the timeline as well. Clear all markers. That sort of cleans the slate so things go back to behaving the way you would expect them to. Now, everything we've done so far has been cuts only. What if we want to drop in a clip into the B track and actually do a little transition here? Well, couldn't be simpler. Again, in keeping with working just in the monitor window and working with buttons and keyboard shortcuts, remember our little target windows down here. The audio section of that is set to none. The video pop-up is set to video 1A. Well, that's the track we've been working in. All we have to do is change that to B, and now anything that we plunk in is going to drop into the B track instead of the A track. Now, if you prefer keyboard shortcuts, there is one that allows you to toggle through your different available video and audio tracks. We'll use that to assign our target track to video 1B. And now if we pick our flying clip, we'll set a quick in point and an out point. And this is a good time to show that you can actually set in and out points as you're playing dynamically. I like that. Let's hit an in point. Yeah, that's pretty good. Let's hit an out point. Now you hit the stop key, and our in point and out points were assigned on the fly. And we've still got our timeline option set to shift material in unlocked tracks. Well, this is an unlocked track, and this material is where we want to drop in our video. So if we were just to hit our insert button, we would not only drop in the clip that we just defined into track B, but we would also move this clip downriver, which we don't want to do. So rather than hitting the insert button, we will hit the overlay button, which drops this clip in, leaving this one in place. And if we position our little time marker in the overlap point and hit the default transition without having to open our transition window and drag the transition down, the default transition that we set earlier, which is cross dissolve, has now been applied into place here auto-magically. Let's adjust the duration of this just a little bit and quickly do a preview and see what we've done so far. So that's a brief overview of some of the new editing tools in Premiere and how they work. We go into them in much greater detail in the full version of Total Premiere. Now let's move on to audio. Good audio is a critical part of most editing projects, and Premiere handles audio better than just about any program out there. With 99 channels and a ton of new effects at your disposal, Premiere has become the program of choice for audio finishing work. Let's take a quick look at what's there. So as you've seen in some of the other sections, you can work with audio as a source clip just like any other source clip. With one exception, you can't see anything in the new monitor window with regards to audio. And sometimes you want to be able to see that waveform when you're trying to precisely decide exactly where you want your in point and your out point to be. Well, you can still get that. If we go to our audio bin here, if you hold down a modifier key when you double click on an audio clip, instead of adding it just to the source window in the monitor window, it instead brings it up in the old familiar Premiere window where you can scroll through or use the fine-tuned scrolling controls to find exactly where you want to do your edit. And here you can mark your in and your out points just like anything else. So just to let you know, your waveform is still there if you want to get it. Of course, it'll also show up down here in the timeline. But let's take a look at what audio looks like in the timeline now. Well, first of all, any track, we've got a music track and a voice track, can be either mono or stereo. So a single track can contain both left and right channel information. Of course, you can split those tracks out as well if you want to. But if we look at our music track here, this is a stereo track. And when we pop it open, we've got this little red line running across things. This is our gain control. Now by default it starts at 100%, meaning we are as loud as we imported this file. This is as loud as it thinks it should be. This is 100% of its level. If we need our audio to be any louder, we just click and drag up this line to a new level, and now it will boost the audio up from 100% to whatever that level is. You can add as many of these points as you like to very finely control the volume throughout a clip. Now, you get a certain fine level of control here by just clicking and moving points, but if you need even finer control, or if you'd really like to see exactly what you're setting, if you hold the Shift key down when you click on any of these points and drag, you get an exact percentage point reading of just how loud or how soft you're making that line or that point. And just for extra bonus, it actually gives you the decibel value that you're setting to as well. Now that's a stereo track. If we look at our voice track, this is a mono track, and once again it has a little red rubber band to finely control gain, make things louder, make things softer. But it also has a blue line running through it, and that blue line, if you hold your modifier key down, you get access to it, also is a rubber band track. It allows you to set points that are up and down, but what this is adjusting is actually the stereo pan of our mono track. By adjusting these values, you can see the little letter R and the little letter L. This is saying that our track is now panned over to the right channel, then pans over to the left channel, then back to the right. You can very precisely place your mono tracks in the 3D world of stereo audio. Now this is a good time to point out another one of the little interface enhancements in Premiere 5.0. Now this works cross-platform, but in different ways. On the PC, you'll use the right mouse button. On the Mac, you'll hold the Control key down and click on any element anywhere in the interface, and it'll bring up a context-sensitive menu, which means it brings up a menu of selections that are appropriate for whatever it is you're clicking on. In the case of audio, if we bring up our context-sensitive menu, we could ripple delete it, we can enable it, we can lock it, we can make an alias for it, and we can do all this other stuff for it. All are things that otherwise would be buried in the menus at the top of the screen, but now they're all in one convenient menu located right on top of the element that we click on with our modifier key or with our right mouse button. Now in this case, what I want to point out is under the audio selection, there's another gain control. Now, what we've animated here with our little red rubber band tools is the gain of this particular channel and of this particular channel. However, if you have several different channels of audio, say you have two different people talking, say you have a man and a woman holding a conversation and you shot them with separate cameras and separate audio tracks, you very carefully go through and adjust the gain for the man's audio, then you very carefully go through and adjust the gain for the woman's audio. Then when you bring them both into Premiere and edit them together, you realize, oh no, the man's audio is too soft. I want to bring the level of the man's audio up to the level of the woman's audio. But you've got all of these gain controls, and you don't want to have to go through and painstakingly pick every one of them and move them up, move them down. What this gain control is all about is a clip-specific gain amount that gets applied after you've done all of these gain controls. Now this won't show up anywhere, so you won't have any visual reference that you've done this, but just know that you can go back after you've fine-tuned each individual clip, then apply a gain value that supersedes those fine-tuning controls that you've done to further fine-tune clips so that they go better with each other. But note that if we typed 150% in here and hit enter, that you won't see any effect at all in the timeline. The gain controls look pretty much exactly the same. And this is another one of those gotcha situations. If you're sharing a project with somebody else, maybe you're following along, they're doing some work, you're doing some work, and you can't figure out why the audio on one channel seems much louder than the audio on another channel, check your gain settings for your individual clips. It's possible that somebody's gone in and set a gain value that boosts the level of one gain clip over another, and that's where your problem lies. At any rate, Premiere gives you incredible control over your audio. And another big reason for that is that they've added a whole bunch of really useful professional audio filters. Now, we're not going to go through them in any detail on this tape because we don't really have time, but we'll just show you that there's more than a dozen new audio filters at your disposal to add effects or to clean up audio. For example, the parametric EQ is a full-featured equalizer that allows you to precisely identify a frequency that you want to adjust, how wide that frequency is, so if you really need to go and razor sharp extract just one little element of your audio, and whether or not you're boosting it or cutting it. Now, each EQ filter has 3 bands of adjustment that you can work with. You can apply many of these filters on top of each other until you get your audio sounding exactly the way you want it. But an even more important thing to point out, not only do you get a live preview that if you click it will quickly preview your sound as you make your adjustments, but when we click OK, note we've got our little filtered list over here, but down here at the bottom of the window we now also have this keyframe section of the dialog box. The blue first keyframe is highlighted. If we move anywhere else in this gray line and click, it brings up the EQ box again, and we can make adjustments to that box. We can change the settings, and when we click OK, a new keyframe has been added here that contains those settings. And Premiere will smoothly interpolate the values between keyframes so that you can animate audio filters to very, very precisely clean up audio. Now, how do you fine-tune them? You've just got this gray bar that's the length of your audio clip, and if you have a really, really long audio clip, it's not going to do you that much good just dragging around inside this bar. You're not going to know where you are. You need a bigger monitor than this to do it effectively, so it's hard to show it on this TV screen, but if you look down at the bottom of the screen as I drag this keyframe around, you can see you get a reference in your timeline of exactly where you are. So if you can see your waveform as you drag your keyframe around, you can see exactly where your keyframe falls within your clip, so you can really, really fine-tune your effects visually that way. Just want to point out that video filters are applied just the same way as audio filters are, and keyframed the same way. Bring in a video clip, click on it, access its pop-up menu to apply a filter, and then the filter can be keyframed over time just like an audio filter can. So that's our whirlwind tour of what's new in Premiere 5.0. As you can see from this brief look, Premiere is ready for prime time. No other program in its class offers this level of professional quality, depth, and third-party support. If you liked what you saw in this demo, don't forget to contact Total Training about the full version of Total Premiere. Until then, remember, you got into this business to be creative, make a living, and above all, have fun. For Total Premiere, I'm Brian Maffitt. I'll see you in the next tape.